What kind of training did you receive to work in a corporate funeral parlor? I know you're doing training for others now.
Hmm.
What kind of training? Do you go to school for that
So,
kind of
yeah, each state actually has different regulations of what you need to do to be a funeral director. And Colorado is one of the states that you don't have to go to a mortuary college. I had an associate's degree, and then I worked 200 or 350 plus hours in a funeral home. So then I was a funeral director. Other states, you have a 4-year degree. Some have a 2-year program, some have a 1-year program. There's some states where you have to be an embalmer, whether you want to do it or not, before you can be a funeral director. Um, so yeah, it's a little bit different, but I got I would say my core education did come from that corporate um training, which a lot of it for me at least was very business focused and less people and grief focused. And so I got a lot of that education on my own, and I studied sociology and got my bachelor's degree in that, and that really gave me the humanness that I was lacking, I felt like, in my training as a funeral director. I know that sounds strange, and I know that's not true for all funeral directors. There's some great funeral, and mortuary colleges out there, but yeah, it's not quite what I think people perceive, our training would be like.
is embalming the chief skill that you have to learn to become a funeral director? What are the other ones?
Well, I don't even want embalming to be one of them. I think so here's a really fun fact I told you about, that you can have home funerals. Most
Right.
people don't understand that embalming is never required. It's not required by law. You can always say, "No, I don't want them to be embalmed." It's a very invasive procedure. I've watched it many, many times. And when I worked in the more corporate world and they did a lot of embalmings, I had a lot of families say, "That doesn't look like my person." They look kind of strange. They look waxy or they have too much cosmetics. This last funeral home I worked at was completely natural. It was a green funeral home, meaning we did no embalming. Um, and I never once had a family make a complaint, not once. And I want to advocate for that, to tell families too that they have a choice not to do embalming, that they can keep their person intact and they still look just as good as they did, when they were alive, other than the fact that they're dead now.
Why is it done?
Um, so embalming was actually first used during the Civil War when soldiers from the North were dying in the South, and the families wanted their bodies sent back north for funerals and burials. But back then there was no refrigeration, and the bodies were being sent by train. And by the time they got there, they were badly decomposed. So it was actually President Abraham Lincoln who brought this gentleman over, and they started doing these crude embalmings on the battlefields so that soldiers could go home. Um, Now, fast forward to now, and we have refrigeration, we have different tools for preservation. So, embalming isn't really necessary, in my opinion, other than the fact that it can do some restoration. Meaning, if somebody was in an accident or had something, really damaging happening to their body or their face, an embalmer can fix that. They can do restoration. They have tools where they can build an ear, they can build a nose, they can make somebody look like the person. And I think viewings and spending time with a body after death are so important. And so I think embalmers do have an art for that work. But in general, for everyday, families, um, a lot of funeral homes say that it's for safety, like you can't be around a dead body, and that can't be further from the truth. The CDC even has a thing saying an unembalmed body or an embalmed body are just as safe to be around. It's not one or the other. And in fact, embalming is really not safe for the embalmers, for the funeral homes, because they're using what's formaldehyde, which causes cancer, and you're taking all the blood out of the body and now putting this chemical inside. And so when I think about it that way, to keep somebody completely intact, not to take out their blood, not to put any chemicals inside, seems a lot more hygienic and safe to be around than somebody who has had an embalming procedure done. But there's a lot of funeral homes that still stand by the fact that somebody has to be embalmed to do a public visitation. And that's a place that I'm very passionate about. And the battle is really here in America. America, Canada, Puerto Rico, Mexico, the Philippines, and New Zealand are really the only countries that do embalming. Embalming is against the law in certain countries. They don't practice embalming at all. So yeah, embalming is something I'm very passionate about because I really feel strongly that most of the time it's not necessary. And if anything, I've seen it cause trauma for families when they are trying to look at their person and they're like, that's not them. What did you do to them? Versus when I do nothing except for do some light cosmetics, maybe brush their hair and they go, that's them. That's my person.
I'm still trying to get my head around what else you have to learn to become a funeral director.
Um, I mean, it really just depends on the state. Sometimes you don't have to learn. Well, I mean, I should say you learn the history, right? You're going to learn how to care for the body, and that's typically embalming. I would love to see more mortuary colleges teach the more natural and organic ways to care for the dead. And then planning funerals, of course, like what makes a funeral service and all the steps that you need to take, and then the different goods that you can sell and how to sell them. And some mortuary colleges are doing more kind of grief um, focused work too. And I do know of a mortuary college that also helps funeral directors be celebrants so that they can actually do the funeral and preside over it as well. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
In your hundreds and hundreds of funerals that you presided is the wrong term, but you've been involved with,
Directed.
directed. I'm wondering if you have gathered a sense of why people don't talk about these events. Is it simply fear? Is it which is what I would
No.
presume.
Yeah, and I think we think it's fear, but really it's grief. People are really afraid of being sad. And for me, I've never really been afraid of the dying process, and I think a lot of people are afraid of that, because we don't know what it is, we don't remember. I felt the same kind of nervousness right before I had my first kid of like, "How am I gonna do this? What's it gonna be like?" But I volunteered in hospice, and that's one thing that we tell all of our students to do is volunteer in hospice and be with people when they die, because that's really gonna take the fear aspect of what dying is like. Um, and for a long time, I mean, for very, very hundreds of years, people did die in their home. It was their family that were taking care of them at the end of their life, so they saw it, but now people are dying in nursing homes and assisted living or hospitals. Um, and hospital deaths, unfortunately, normally feel traumatic. Even if the person has been sick for a while, there's still machines, there's still in and outs, there's still, code blues down the hall. Um, and that can be scary feeling. That doesn't feel good. When you ask somebody, how do you want to die? It's typically, oh, I want to die at home in my sleep, right? But that's not the kind of deaths that we've had here in America for a very, very long time. And so people don't even really know what it's like. And so that factor scares them. Um, Whereas in other countries, they aren't as afraid because they do have a more active role in the dying process. And if you have the privilege of being with somebody when they're dying, you know, at home on hospice care, and you understand the different stages of the dying process, just like there's different stages when you're in labor and having a baby, there are different stages in the dying process. And so you can see those and you can understand, okay, mom has 3 days left. She's at this point in the dying process. And I've seen a lot of families have a lot of peace around that, of being able to see it, and that takes that fear part away, but it doesn't take the grief part away. And I think a lot of people have a really hard time with being sad and knowing how to process that, and so therefore they don't even wanna talk about death at all, because death is sad to them versus death is a part of life and a process and something to be celebrated. And that'll actually, as strange as it sounds, when we accept death and when we talk about it, it's going to help that grief part tremendously, because you've kind of, unknowns to you, you're doing kind of grief work before the death has taken place, because you're already kind of thinking about it and planning it. Even for my own self, I planned my funeral when I first started working at a funeral home when I was 19. And
Whoa.
I know, and it's not, to me, it's not morbid at all. To me, it's like, "All right, this is my ultimate party. It better be good. I'm gonna get it all on paper," because it's guaranteed. It's not like something that, "Oh, maybe I'll have a wedding someday. Let me make my big book of all my wedding plans," which so many people do, right? But not very many people say, "Ooh, I wanna plan my funeral. Ooh, I want this casket and these flowers," even though we know it's going to happen, right?
What do you want your funeral to be like?
I love answering this. So I want a natural burial, which means I will be in a natural burial preserve. So that's going to be protected land, and the burial happens typically at 3 feet, where the body can decompose at a natural rate versus at 6 feet, which we is our typical burial at cemeteries. I always say if you've been 6 feet in the ground, it is cold down there. It's like a root cellar. So it actually is going to slow down the natural process because it's keeping the body really cold down there. And there's no worms or living things to help with that process. I really want to return to the earth. I want my body to give back and to become flowers and to become trees again. So that has always been something really important to me, even since I was a teenager. Um, a few things have changed, but I do want everybody to wear like nice clothes. And I say nice clothes, I don't want people to wear black, you know. I would love to see people wear a floor length red dress or the most colorful outfits that, you know, remind you of me. I'm going to have a margarita fountain. That is a must. um dancing to all my favorite songs. Safety Dance by Men in Hats. I've I've said that that is going to be the song that people follow my shrouded body to with streamers, and I want them to celebrate and sing it. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much my funeral that I've had planned in my head for the last 30 or 20